No, here's another thing nobody's really noticed. Governor Romney and the rest have supported also a thing the Republican leaders call cut, cap, and balance. They call it cut, cap, and balance. Now that's another one of those new Republican Party plans, which are probably the right tested words. Who can be against cut, cap, and balance? Except nobody knows what it really means. Nobody knows exactly what they intend. Because like so many of the most damaging things, it looks and sounds innocuous. So let me cut through, no pun intended, and tell you what it means in plain English. The cut are significant cuts in Social Security benefits. They'll tell you, don't worry, you won't be cut. You won't be cut, as if all you care about is yourself. As if all, see the thing that I get angry about, they look at people like you and me and they think all we care about, after all you've done for the nation, is that all we care about is ourselves. After a lifetime of you not only caring for yourselves, but caring for all those people you love, caring for your community. And they turn around and say, as long as we tell you, you won't be cut, you won't mind if your children. You won't mind if your grandchildren. You won't mind if your younger neighbors and friends end up having to pay. They don't understand us. Look, the cap they talk about is the cap on what we ask of the wealthiest Americans, the top percentage of Americans, and what they pay to make this country work. And the balance they talk about is they balance the budget on the backs of seniors and middle-class Americans. Why? So that they can preserve, this is not your father's Republican Party, guys, so that they can preserve a $1 trillion tax cut. A new $1 trillion tax cut for the wealthiest Americans. And that's not hyperbole, folks. That is not hyperbole. That's what this is about. Governor Romney supports cut, cap, and balance, and which is yet another demonstration that there is no daylight between Governor Romney and Republican leaders on the most important issues facing this country. And not even Romney's Etch-a-Sketch can change that. You won't be able to do that. I mean, you may buy a new one, but you can't do it. Folks, we can resolve the challenges Social Security faces. And we can do it in good faith. We did it before. I was there. In 1983, it looked like Social Security was going to run out of money. Remember, it was coming to an end. 1983. I sat down in a room as one of the junior guys with leaders like Republican Bob Dole, Bill Roth, chairman of the Finance Committee, President Ronald Reagan, Democrats like Pat Moynihan and Tip O'Neill. And we shook hands. We shook hands. Everybody gave something. And we preserved the system through 2028. Together we solved it for generations at that time. Look, folks, you know in your gut. You know in your gut what I know. It's about being willing to put politics aside, just for a moment. Just put it aside for a moment to preserve the single most significant and consequential government initiative in American history, Social Security. Look, some of you remember, I remember, these two guys won't remember. Some of you and I remember. We don't remember a day when we didn't have Social Security, but we remember a day when our grandparents didn't have Medicare. And remember what it meant. Remember what it meant. We remember. Look, what we need today is just a temporary, like I say in grade school, a timeout. Just a timeout. And say, okay, what are we going to do to deal with preserving both these programs? And that's what's missing this time, folks. It was there in 1981 and 82 and 85 and 89. Because today's new Republican Party is fixed on one thing: additional tax cuts for the very wealthy. When we tried to put 400,000 teachers back to work and 18,000 cops back to work because the city budgets are being crunched, we said, okay, we'll have a 0.5% tax on every dollar after the first million you make. That would have paid for the whole thing. No Republican would vote for it. Millionaires were calling me saying they were for it. I come from a wealthy state of Delaware. The people up there, the people who have the money, knew they should be paying just a little more to preserve that. Folks, these guys won't budge a single inch on a $1 trillion problem. Look, we know we have to bring our budget back into balance. There was a Democratic president who last balanced the budget, I remind y'all of. The day that President Obama and I were sworn in, the day we were sworn in, that magnificent day on January 20th, looking out at 1 million people on the wall watching, we were handed that day a gigantic deficit and an economy that was in free fall. And we moved ahead. We moved ahead to get the economy moving again, but we also moved ahead to begin to cut the deficit. Last year, with the help of my two colleagues, we cut spending by $1 trillion. We also made a deal. We also made a deal with our Republican friends to cut it by another $1.2 trillion and set up that super committee, remember? What did they come up with? Nothing. And we're on our way, on the cusp of negotiating, and I was doing most of the negotiation, for an agreement that would have cut the overall deficit by $4 trillion. But the Republicans, they walked away from it. Why? Because they wanted to maintain every major tax cut to the very wealthiest and have them move in perpetuity. Look, they want an additional $1 trillion in tax cuts. And I want to explain, when you say that, it's like, trillion, that doesn't, trillion, you can't even calculate. Let me put it this way. Of that $1 trillion, $813 million of that $1 trillion tax cut will go to households making over $1 million a year. 315,000 of the wealthiest families in America, average income $3.1 million a year, would get a $100,000 tax break per year in the next 10 years.
Okay, why?
Look, we're not asking anybody very wealthy to change their standard of living. We're not, no, I'm serious. We're not asking them to do anything they can't do now. On 3.1 million, you don't need another 100,000 to maintain your home, to drive the vehicle you drive, to vacation where you want to vacation. But when we ask you to take a 20% cut or a 30% cut in your Medicare or your Social Security or your children, that changes the standard of living. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't think it's fair. And we don't think it's right. And more importantly, we don't think it's in the interest of the economic growth of this country. Folks, it's simple math. Either you preserve Medicare and fix Social Security and draw down the deficit, or you spend another $1 trillion on tax cuts for the wealthiest. You can't do both of these things. You can't do both. And we refuse. We refuse to shift the burden and responsibility of putting America's fiscal house in order on the backs of those who will have to change their standard of living, who have played by the rules, who have worked hard all their lives, and have earned the retirement benefits they're getting. Ladies and gentlemen, like so many of you, I came from a family where Medicare and Social Security made the difference in the lives of the people I love the most. I'm not sure, as I said, that these guys remember what it was like when folks didn't have Medicare. But I can remember, a lot of you can remember it, as I said. And it wasn't an era, it's not an era that we want to go back to again. Without Social Security, nearly half of American seniors, 17 million men and women, would be struggling in poverty. Just that alone. Before Medicare, nearly half of all Americans age 65 lacked health care. 1/2 of all Americans lack health care. These programs have afforded the elderly a sense, and I don't like the word elderly anymore, man. I'm not big on that word. You? I don't like that elderly. I mean, for years I used to rip up the AARP. But I'm not ripping up my Social Security checks. But I don't like elderly. Those of us who are more mature. It's about our independence. It's about the dignity everybody craves. They argue that cutting now is the only way to save programs for the next generation. I read an article in the paper today here about that. That's not how I see it. Retirement is multi-generational. It matters to your children if you have a decent retirement. Every one of you, it matters to your children. Because if you don't, your children feel obliged to step up. Caring for a parent is a privilege, and one that any honorable child will try to undertake. But for some families, it would come at an incredibly high cost, because they're struggling so badly themselves. The cost for my family was de minimis because of the circumstance my mom's 4 children were in. There's a lot of families you know that can't get their kid to college, they're having trouble paying the mortgage, they're out of a job, and the added burden of looking at mom and dad and knowing they don't have the health care they need, or having to make these choices that you talked about when you go into the drugstore. That's something that is multi-generational. When families are stretched thin, it forces very hard choices. And I say families, not when we are stretched thin, when our children as well are stretched thin. So folks, this is about more than the monthly payment or access to health care. It's about who we are. The last thing my mother and father wanted to do was be a burden to me, my brothers, or my sister, or to our children. Social Security and Medicare help them live independently right to the very end. Preserve their dignity, and most importantly, from my dad's perspective, his pride. So when these guys, in the name of saving the next generation, choose to cut Social Security and voucherize Medicare rather than asking for shared responsibility from all, they're not saving the next generation. They're thrusting an incredible burden on the next generation. They're thrusting it on them right now. They make it even harder for the middle class at a time when we know if we want our economy to be strong, the middle class has to be strong. They're tearing the bonds that connect us generation to generation at the very moment we should be strengthening those bonds. Ladies and gentlemen, this year you're going to make some choices about what you want, who you want to lead this country, and who will speak up for you and speak in the way you want on this and many other issues. On this issue, I ask you to do one thing, as I said in the beginning. When you look at Barack and me, when you look at our opponents, take our measure. I used to say when I ran as a kid, look me over. If you like what you see, vote for me. If not, vote for the other guy. But look us over and look into your heart. Look into your heart and ask yourself the question after all the speeches are done. Who do you believe? Who do you believe is genuinely committed to preserving the dignity of people in terms of their health care and their basic ability to live? Thank you all very much.